If you've ever had an older sibling, you probably know about the unwritten rules. There's a pecking order. The front seat of the car, the last slice of pizza, the TV remote. These aren't just objects. They're symbols of power. And in my house, that power belonged to my brother, Hayes. 10 years ago, when I was 15, my world felt like it was shrinking every single day, and Hayes was the one making the walls close in. He was 17. At that age, 2 years isn't just a number, it's a canyon. Hayes had already hit his major growth spurt. He was taller, broader, and carried the effortless confidence of someone who had never lost a physical contest in his own home. I, on the other hand, was still stuck in that awkward teenage limbo, all knees and elbows with a voice that couldn't decide which octave it wanted to live in. We were brothers, but in the ecosystem of our house, we were two different species. He was the predator, and I was the one who learned to make himself small. It wasn't like he was some kind of monster, not in the way you see in movies. It was more subtle, more casual. His dominance was woven into the fabric of our daily lives, 1,000 tiny moments that reminded me of my place. He operated on a system of physical tolls. If I wanted to get past him in the hallway, there was a toll, a hard shoulder check that would send me stumbling into the wall, followed by a lazy, "Watch it," as if I was the one taking up too much space. If I was getting a drink from the fridge, the toll might be a sudden jarring noogie that rattled my teeth, just because he was walking by. He never had to ask for anything. He just took it. And the living room was his kingdom. I remember this one afternoon so clearly. It was a Tuesday. A new expansion for my favorite video game had just come out, and I had rushed home from school, finished my homework in record time, and finally sat down on the couch controller in hand. I booted up the console, the familiar theme music starting to play. It was that perfect moment of escape. For the next few hours, I wouldn't be Cooper, the gangly younger brother. I'd be a warrior, an explorer, a hero. I was maybe 10 minutes into a new quest when I felt the couch dip beside me. I didn't even have to look. I could feel the heat from his arm, smell the faint scent of the cheap body spray he used. "My turn," Hayes said. It wasn't a question. It was a declaration. My shoulders tensed. "What?" "No, I just started. The update just came out." My voice was tight a little higher than I wanted it to be. He let out a short, humorless laugh, a sound I hated. It was the sound of dismissal. "Don't care," he said, reaching for the controller. My fingers tightened around it instinctively, a tiny, pathetic act of rebellion. "Hayes, come on. I've been waiting all day for this. You can play later." "I don't want to play later. I want to play now." His hand closed over mine, his fingers easily engulfing my own. There was no contest. His grip was like a vice. He wasn't even trying, and I was already losing. I tried to pull back, but it was like trying to wrestle with a statue. "Dude, stop," I pleaded, desperation creeping into my voice. That's when he changed tactics. With his free hand, he simply shoved my shoulder. It wasn't a punch, not even a hard shove, but it was perfectly leveraged. I was off balance, and his push sent me tumbling sideways into the couch cushions. The controller slipped from my grasp. He plucked it out of the air, leaned back, and started his own game without another word. I just lay there, half sprawled on the couch, the fabric smelling like stale popcorn. My face burning with the unique hot shame of being utterly powerless. He hadn't hurt me. I wouldn't have a bruise, but he had reminded me in no uncertain terms that my wants were irrelevant if they conflicted with his. My time, my plans, my little slice of happiness, it could all be erased with a single casual push. I pushed myself up, my whole body buzzing with a frustrated, useless anger. I wanted to scream, to throw something to hit him and wipe that smug, indifferent look off his face. But I knew what would happen. If I escalated, he would escalate. My pathetic shove would be met with a real one. My angry words would be met with a headlock that would leave my ears ringing. He was bigger, stronger, and we both knew it. The fight was over before it ever began. So I did what I always did. I retreated. I stood up, smoothed down my shirt, and walked out of the room, his shadow feeling like it was chasing me down the hall. I could hear the sounds of my game fading behind me. I went to my room and shut the door. the click of the latch, sounding like the final note in a song of defeat. That was my life, a series of small surrenders. Avoiding his path in the house, eating dinner quickly so I wouldn't have to be at the table with him waiting until he was out to use the things we were supposed to share. It was also the way he'd stand in the doorway of my room, just leaning against the frame, watching me. He wouldn't say anything. He'd just stand there, invading my only safe space with his presence, until I finally got unnerved and asked, "What do you want?" He'd just smirk. Nothing. Then he'd walk away, leaving me feeling tense and exposed. It was a constant, low-grade psychological warfare punctuated by these little physical reminders that he was in charge. He was the sun, and I was just a small planet caught in his orbit, my path dictated entirely by his gravitational pull. I was so tired of it, tired of flinching when he walked past, tired of planning my day around his moods, tired of the burning knot of resentment in my stomach that never seemed to go away. Lying on my bed that afternoon, staring at the ceiling, I replayed the moment on the couch over and over. The ease with which he'd pushed me, the way the controller just slipped out of my hand, the finality of it all. At 15, you're supposed to be figuring out who you are gaining independence. But I felt like I was losing myself, my world defined and limited by my brother's whims. Something inside me felt brittle, like a branch in winter, covered in ice. It had been bending for years under the weight of his dominance, but now it felt ready to snap. I didn't know what I was going to do. I had no plan. All I knew was that I couldn't live like this anymore. I couldn't spend the next few years until one of us moved out as a guest in my own home, always waiting for the next casual shove. In our world, he was the hammer and I was the nail. But I had no idea how to change the fundamental physics of our relationship. He was bigger, he was stronger. That was the simple, brutal truth. And as far as I could see, there was absolutely nothing I could do to change it. That feeling of being a nail waiting for the hammer didn't go away. For the next week, it was my constant companion. I felt it every time I heard Hayes's heavy footsteps in the hall. I felt it when I had to ask him to pass the salt at dinner. Every interaction, no matter how small, was filtered through that lens of powerlessness. I became a ghost in my own house, perfecting the art of being unseen. I learned the exact creaks in the floorboards that would announce his approach. I knew his schedule when he'd be out with friends, when he'd be monopolizing the TV, and I planned my own life in the negative space he left behind. It was exhausting. The brittle feeling I'd had, that sense of being a branch about to snap, just got worse. The ice around it got thicker. I was walking on eggshells, not just around him, but around my own emotions. I was terrified that if I let myself feel the full force of my anger, I would do something stupid, something that would provoke him into doing more than just a casual shove. So I bottled it up, pushing it down into a cold, hard knot in my gut. The snap finally came about a week after the video game incident. It was a Saturday afternoon. I hadn't done anything to provoke it. I was just existing. I was in the kitchen making myself a sandwich, the most harmless activity in the world. I was actually in a decent mood for once. I just finished a book I really liked, and I was looking forward to just relaxing in my room. It was a rare moment of quiet. Then the back door slid open, and Hayes walked in with two of his friends. I didn't know them well, just that they were on the football team with him. They were all 17, all built like linebackers, and they filled our small kitchen with a loud, boisterous energy that immediately put me on edge. They were laughing about something, and the air crackled with their confidence. I tried to make myself smaller, hoping to finish my sandwich and escape unnoticed. I kept my back to them, focusing intently on spreading mustard on a slice of bread, as if it were the most important task I'd ever undertaken. "Hey, Coop," Hayes said. His voice had that tone it got when he was performing for an audience. It was louder, deeper, laced with a kind of mocking amusement. I didn't turn around. "Hey," I mumbled, hoping that would be the end of it. Of course it wasn't. I heard his friends chuckle. I felt a presence right behind me, and the hairs on my arms stood up. "Making a sandwich," Hayes asked, his voice right next to my ear. "You gonna eat all that by yourself, little man?" His friends laughed again, a sharp barking sound. A hot flush crept up my neck. I just wanted them to leave. I just wanted to be left alone. I put the other slice of bread on top of my sandwich and reached for a knife to cut it in half. That's when it happened. As my hand closed around the knife on the counter, Hayes suddenly grabbed my wrist. Not hard enough to break it, but with an iron grip that was impossible to shake. At the same time, he hooked his foot around my ankle and pulled. It was a simple, brutally effective motion. My feet went out from under me, and with my wrist still in his grasp, I had no way to catch myself. I went down, hard. I didn't hit my head, but I landed squarely on my back on the linoleum floor, the wind knocked out of me in a painful gasp. The sandwich I just made flew from my other hand and skidded across the floor, leaving a sad yellow smear of mustard near the trash can. The kitchen erupted in laughter. It wasn't just a chuckle this time. It was deep, howling laughter, the kind that echoes in your ears. I looked up from the floor, my vision blurry for a second, and saw the three of them standing over me. Three giants silhouetted by the kitchen light, looking down at me like I was a bug they'd just stepped on. Hayes had a wide, triumphant grin on his face. He was the king of his court, and I was the jester, the source of their entertainment. Whoa, clumsy. Hayes said, the fake sympathy in his voice making it 1,000 times worse. He offered me a hand, but it was a joke. I knew if I took it, he'd just pull me up halfway and let me fall again. The humiliation was a physical thing. It felt like acid pouring into my stomach. It wasn't just that he'd knocked me down, it was that he'd done it so easily, so thoughtlessly in front of his friends. He had used me as a prop to make them laugh. I wasn't his brother in that moment. I was a thing, an object for his amusement. I slapped his hand away and scrambled to my feet on my own, my face burning. My whole body was trembling, a cocktail of adrenaline and pure, undiluted rage. "What is wrong with you?" I hissed, my voice shaking. Hayes' smile vanished. His friends stopped laughing and took a half step back. The mood in the room shifted from amusement to something colder. He didn't like being challenged, especially not in front of people. "What'd you say to me?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. He took a step forward, invading my space, forcing me to back up until my spine hit the edge of the kitchen counter. He was so much bigger than me. He put his hands on the counter on either side of me, trapping me. He leaned in close, his face just inches from mine. I said, "What is wrong with you?" I repeated, though my voice was barely a whisper now. The fire was still there, but it was being suffocated by the old, familiar fear. He just stared at me for a long moment, a cold look in his eyes. Then a slow, cruel smirk spread across his lips. He reached up with one hand and grabbed a fistful of my hair. He pulled my head forward and started grinding his knuckles into my scalp in a vicious noogie. It wasn't playful. It was painful. It was meant to dominate, to punish, to remind me of my place. Stars popped in my vision, and my eyes watered. "You need to learn some respect, little brother." He ground out his knuckles, digging deeper. His friends were watching silent now, their expressions a mix of discomfort and fascination. After what felt like an eternity, he shoved my head back and let go. He stepped away, his point made. "Clean up your mess," he said, gesturing with his chin toward the ruined sandwich on the floor. Then he and his friends walked out their laughter, starting up again as soon as they were in the living room. I stood there, trapped between the counter and the empty space they left behind my scalp, throbbing. I was breathing in ragged gasps, trying not to cry. It wasn't the pain. It was the absolute soul-crushing humiliation of it all. He hadn't just knocked me down. He hadn't just hurt me. He had paraded my weakness in front of others. He had held me down and scrubbed my face in the dirt, and I had been completely unable to stop him. I slid down to the floor, my back against the cabinets, and just sat there. I stared at the smear of mustard on the linoleum. That was me, a meaningless smear on the floor of his world. The hammer and the nail. That thought came back to me, but now it was different. Before it was a metaphor for our power dynamic. Now I realized it was a description of my future. If I did nothing, I would spend the rest of my life as the nail. I would get a job, a family, a life of my own. But somewhere deep inside, I would always be that 15-year-old boy on the kitchen floor, waiting for the next blow to fall. The physics of our relationship felt like a law of nature, as unchangeable as gravity. But what if it wasn't? What if physics could be learned? What if there was a different kind of science, one that didn't care about size and weight? That's when the brittle branch inside me finally snapped. It wasn't a loud, angry break. It was a quiet, clean split. The anger and the shame and the fear all fell away, and what was left was a single cold, clear thought. This will never happen again. Not, I wish this wouldn't happen. Not, I hope he stops. A statement of fact, a promise I was making to myself. This ends now. I picked myself up off the floor, walked past the sandwich without a glance, and went to my room. I shut the door and locked it. I sat down at our old desktop computer and waited for it to boot up the dial-up modem, screeching its ancient song. I opened a search engine and I typed. I didn't type how to get stronger. I knew that would take years. I typed how to beat a bigger opponent. The search results were a revelation. I scrolled past articles about cheap shots and dirty fighting. That wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want to win ugly. I wanted to win cleanly. I wanted to change the equation itself. Then I started seeing words I didn't know. Leverage, fulcrum, center of gravity, joint manipulation. I started seeing the names of martial arts, karate, taekwondo, and then two that stood out, judo and Krav Maga. The descriptions were different. They weren't about punching and kicking as much as they were about redirecting an opponent's energy, using their own strength and momentum against them. It was the physics I was looking for, a science designed for the nail to defeat the hammer. I found a local dojo, a place in a strip mall about a 20-minute bike ride away. Their website was basic, but it listed their programs. They had a 12-week adult and teen fundamentals course that covered the basics of both judo and Krav Maga. It was designed for beginners, for people who knew nothing, for people like me. Then I saw the price. It was a lot. For a 15-year-old, it was a fortune. But then I thought about the money I had saved. Every dollar I'd earned from 2 summers of mowing lawns, every birthday check from my grandparents, all of it was sitting in an envelope tucked inside a hollowed-out book on my shelf. I'd been saving for a new game console. I did the math. The course would take almost everything I had. The choice was so clear it was almost laughable. A new game console I could be pushed away from at any moment, or a chance to never be pushed again. It wasn't a choice at all. My hand was shaking as I picked up the phone. I dialed the number from the website, my heart pounding in my chest. I cupped my hand over the receiver, speaking in a low voice, terrified Hayes would walk by and overhear. A man with a calm, professional voice answered. I asked about the 12-week course. I told him my age. He said that was fine. He told me when the next session started next Tuesday. I'd like to sign up, I said, my voice barely a squeak. I gave him my name and paid the deposit over the phone with my dad's credit card, knowing I'd have to replace the cash in his wallet with my savings before he ever saw the bill, an act of financial espionage. When I hung up the phone, the silence in my room felt different. It wasn't the silence of defeat anymore. It was the silence of a secret, a plan. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't fear or anger. It was hope. It was small and fragile, but it was there. I hadn't magically become stronger. Hayes was still out there in the living room, still 17, still built like a linebacker. The hammer was still the hammer, but I had just bought myself a blueprint, a 12-week plan to stop being the nail. That first Tuesday felt like walking into another world. The dojo was tucked between a laundromat and a pizza place, and the moment I pushed open the glass door, the smell hit me, a clean, sharp scent of sweat and disinfectant mats. It smelled like effort. Inside, it was a big open room with padded gray floors and mirrors on one wall. There were maybe a dozen other people milling around, a mix of adults, and a few teens like me. No one looked like a movie star. They just looked like people. My instructor was a man named Sensei Mark. He was compact calm and had this air of quiet confidence that was the complete opposite of Hayes's loud, obnoxious dominance. He didn't shout. He didn't posture. He just knew. That first class was a lesson in humility. I was clumsy and awkward. We learned how to fall. That was lesson number 1, how to slap the mat to absorb the impact, how to roll so you don't break a wrist. For the first hour, that's all we did. Fall, get up, fall again. It felt ridiculous, but Sensei Mark explained, you can't win a fight if you're afraid to hit the ground. The ground is just another surface. You have to make friends with it. My brother had spent my entire life making me afraid of hitting the ground. In 1 hour, this stranger was already starting to rewire my brain. The next few weeks were a blur of soreness and secrets. I biked to the dojo 3 times a week right after school, telling my parents I was at the library or a friend's house. I'd come home aching in muscles I didn't even know I had. My shoulders, my back, my legs, everything burned. I remember one night Hayes shoved me aside to get to the fridge, a casual, thoughtless act he'd done 1,000 times. But this time, the spot on my shoulder he shoved was already deeply bruised from practicing breck falls. The pain was electric, a sharp, blinding flash. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood, but I didn't make a sound. I couldn't let him know. Every bruise was a secret investment. Every sore muscle was a brick being laid in a new foundation. I wasn't a natural. Not at all. Other kids picked it up faster, were more athletic, more coordinated. But I had something they didn't, a purpose. I wasn't there to get a new belt or win a tournament. I was there to solve a very specific, very personal problem. So I listened. I watched. I practiced. We moved on from falling to grips, how to break them, how to use them. Sensei Mark would pair me up with guys twice my size and show me how a simple twist of the wrist, a shift in my hips, could completely neutralize their strength. He'd say, don't fight his muscle, fight his balance. A strong man who is falling has no strength at all. It was like being taught a magic trick. The first time I successfully took a 200-pound man off his feet with a simple hip throw, it didn't feel real. He wasn't trying to hurt me, of course. It was just a drill. But the mechanics were real. The physics was undeniable. I felt his weight shift. I turned. I dropped my hips, and suddenly this mountain of a man was sailing over my shoulder and landing harmlessly on the mat. He laughed, slapped me on the back, and said, "Nice one." I just stood there, breathing hard, my mind blown. The hammer could be beaten. I was learning how. For 3 months, I lived a double life. At home, I was still Cooper, the quiet younger brother. I kept my head down. I avoided conflict. I let Hayes have the remote. I let him win. I was playing the long game, and every day I avoided a confrontation was another day I could train. My confidence was growing, but it was a quiet internal thing. On the outside, I probably looked more timid than ever, so focused on not tipping my hand. By the final week of the course, I had been training for 12 weeks. I wasn't an expert or a black belt, but I had the fundamentals. I was a 15-year-old kid who knew how to fall, how to control my center of gravity, and how to use 2 solid takedowns and 3 different pins. According to Sensei Mark, that was all you needed. It happened on a Saturday. I remember it was raining. We were stuck inside, and the air in the house was thick with boredom and tension. Hayes was channel surfing, flicking through so fast it was just a blur of noise and color. "Hey, can you stop on that one?" I asked. A movie I liked was on. He didn't even look at me. He just kept flicking. "Nope." "Come on, Hayes. You're not even watching anything." "And it's my TV." He grunted, which was absurd. It was the family's TV. I made my mistake. I reached for the remote on the cushion next to him. It wasn't an aggressive move, but it was a challenge, a violation of his unspoken rules. His reaction was instantaneous. It was the same script as always. He shot up, his body language all aggression. "What do you think you're doing?" he snarled. And then he did it. He put his hands on me. He grabbed the front of my shirt, bunching it up in his fist, and shoved me back, hard. In that moment, time slowed down. I saw it all coming. I saw the shove. I felt my balance shift backward. But this time, something was different. My brain didn't panic. My body didn't freeze. My training, all 12 weeks of it, kicked in like pure instinct. Instead of fighting the push, I went with it. It was the first thing we learned. Don't resist the force, redirect it. As he shoved me backward, I let my feet slide, but I also turned my hips slightly and grabbed his wrist and the fabric of his sleeve. He was expecting me to stumble and fall. He was expecting fear. He wasn't expecting me to use his own momentum as the engine for his downfall. It was a simple foot sweep, a basic judo throw. As he lunged forward off balance from his own shove, I hooked my foot behind his ankle and pulled. He was a 17-year-old, strong, athletic guy, but physics doesn't care about how much you can bench press. His center of gravity was already too far forward. My small action was just the final domino. The look of surprise on his face was something I will never forget. His eyes went wide as his feet left the floor. He wasn't angry anymore. He was confused. He was falling. I guided his fall just like we practiced in the dojo. He landed on his back on the living room rug with a loud oomph, his head missing the coffee table by a good foot. It wasn't a violent slam, it was a controlled descent. But I wasn't done. The throw was just step one. Before he could even process what had happened, I was on him. I dropped my knee onto his stomach not to hurt him, but for control, and established a pin, a simple scarf hold. I hooked my arm under his head, grabbed his far arm, and used my body weight pressing my chest down onto his. It was over, just like that. The whole thing took maybe 3 seconds. For a moment, there was just stunned silence. He lay there, pinned, looking up at me. The confusion in his eyes slowly turned to rage. He started to struggle to buck and try to throw me off. This was the second test. The old Hayes was still in there. He was strong, much stronger than me. If I tried to match his strength, I would lose. But I didn't fight his muscle. I just held my position. I kept my center of gravity low. I focused on the techniques Sensei Mark had drilled into us. I let him thrash. I let him burn his energy fighting against a system of leverage designed to defeat him. It was like watching a fish fight a hook. The more he struggled, the more exhausted he became. He tried to push me off, but his arms were in the wrong position. He tried to roll, but my weight was distributed perfectly to stop him. After about 10 seconds of furious, useless struggle, he stopped. He just lay there, breathing heavily trapped, powerless, pinned to the floor of our living room by his 15-year-old brother. I didn't say a word. I didn't say, "Who's tough now?" or "had enough." I didn't gloat. I just held the pin, breathing calmly, and looked him in the eye. Everything that needed to be said was being said in that silence. The transfer of power was happening right there on the beige carpet. The entire physical hierarchy of our lives, a structure that had been in place for more than a decade, was being dismantled and rewritten. I held him there for maybe 5 more seconds, just long enough for the new reality to sink in, just long enough for him to understand this wasn't a fluke. Then I let him go. I smoothly disengaged, stood up, and took a step back. I didn't offer him a hand. I just stood there watching. Hayes pushed himself up slowly. He didn't look at me. He looked at the TV at the floor at his hands. He was flushed with embarrassment and shock. The hammer had just been completely and cleanly disassembled by the nail. He stood up, brushed himself off, and without a single word, he turned and walked out of the room and up the stairs to his bedroom. I heard his door click shut. I stood alone in the living room. The movie I wanted to watch was still on. I picked up the remote, sat down on the couch, and watched it. The silence in the house was different. It wasn't the tense waiting silence of before. It was a calm, empty silence. The threat was gone. That was 10 years ago. I'm 25 now, and Hayes is 27. From that day to this one, he has never ever laid a hand on me in anger again. We've had arguments. We've yelled. We've been idiots. We're brothers after all. But the physical intimidation, the shoves, the headlocks, it all stopped. A line had been drawn, and he never tried to cross it again. Looking back, I realized that lawn mowing money was the single best investment I've ever made. I didn't buy a fight. I bought a future. I bought peace in my own home. I bought the right to take up space without fear. It wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. Not the kind you ask for, but the kind you are left with no choice but to give. I learned that true strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about having the knowledge and the confidence to make sure you never have to.